our three-part series, our E-series on cybersecurity. Today's topic is going to be an executive briefing on the current threat landscape and business continuity planning. But first, let me start off with a brief introduction of our two organizations. Vernovus is a staffing and solutions provider focused on technology, cybersecurity, and accounting and finance. Through this model, we are able to both staff up your existing teams with talent to complete your most critical projects, or deliver those outcomes you are pursuing through our team of experienced experts. The Vernovus Solutions practice has core capabilities in the areas of business continuity, network and cloud architecture, Active Directory and group policy, and of course, cybersecurity. Our cybersecurity vertical is built around a virtual CISO model designed to advise and assist companies to build, administer, and maintain a strong cybersecurity program. We're really pleased to be partnering with our friends at the Columbus Collaboratory to bring you this series, and also to use our combined teams to enhance the overall scope and effectiveness of your cybersecurity posture. For those of you not familiar with the Columbus Collaboratory, it was founded by 7 of Columbus's largest corporations in order to provide trusted cybersecurity and artificial intelligence solutions in an effort to reduce costs and increase protection. Their cybersecurity capabilities include security program assessments, operationalizing MITRE ATT&CK, vulnerability management solutions, strategic and tactical cyber threat intelligence sharing, and adversarial emulations. Make sure that you make note to join us for our next 2 upcoming webinars in the series. April 16th, we'll be diving into vulnerability management, and on April 23rd, identity access. So before turning it over to our pretty talented group of cyber leaders, I want to just take a minute to introduce you to each of them. Kevin Jackson is a CISO at Vernovus. Kevin's an executive information technologist, enterprise architect, and chief information security officer with over 25 years of experience in both the commercial and DoD environments. Kevin's areas of expertise include cybersecurity program management, IT systems architecture and compliance management, wireless telecommunications, and IT infrastructure management. During his time supporting the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he was the chief architect and DoD compliance manager for individual IT program investments. Kevin is a part-time adjunct professor within the University of Cincinnati's IT department and the Villanova University College of Professional Studies, where he teaches online classes in cybersecurity, business intelligence, and data analytics. Jeff Schmidt is Vice President and Chief Cybersecurity Innovator at the Columbus Collaboratory. Jeff's 20-year information security career actually started at the Microsoft Corporation, where he spearheaded the first internal malicious testing of Windows 2000. In 1998, Jeff worked with the FBI to create the InfraGard program, receiving commendations from the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI. He authored the Microsoft Windows 2000 Security Handbook and contributed to several books, including the Cybersecurity Policy Guidebook. Jeff is also an adjunct professor of systems security engineering at the Stevens Institute of Technology, a Zurich Cyber Risk Fellow, Cyber Statecraft Initiative at the Atlantic Council, and is a board member for Delta Risk, LLC, which is a global advisory firm focused on security and risk management. Last but certainly not least is Troy Vennon, who's the Director of Security Innovation at the Columbus Collaboratory. Troy has over 20 years of experience in the information security practice, bringing a wealth of experience and leadership to the Collaboratory, which began his 8-year active duty career with the Marine Network and Security Operations Center in Quantico. Troy held a number of progressively more senior IT security positions that included leading security and penetration testing teams, malware research, project management, and director of a global threat center. Since joining the Collaboratory to lead their information sharing and analysis organization, Troy has provided tactical and strategic direction to their customers. So obviously, as you can all see, we've got a great depth of expertise on our panel today, and some folks that I think you can really lean into and trust the knowledge and wisdom that they have behind what's going on today. Just a quick reminder, you can submit questions through the Q&A feature or the chat box. We'll field as many of those as we possibly can at the end. So thanks again for joining. We're glad to have everybody on the call. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to get our presentation kicked off. So Kevin, I'll hand you the mic.
All right. Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate that introduction. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time being here this morning. It is a privilege to get to be here and present this webinar. Our topic, of course, this threat landscape and business continuity planning topic. Obviously, this is very, very timely given what everyone is managing right now throughout the entire COVID-19 landscape. There's a lot to talk about in this topic. In the interest of time, we're going to try to boil it down to really the biggest of the big pictures. And then, as you can see, over the course of multiple weeks, we're going to then be narrowing it down more and more into some of the specifics of how all of this plays in the business continuity picture, in the business continuity structure for enterprises of almost any size and of almost any type. It's a really broad applicability here. So let's jump right in. Our agenda for today, we're going to start off by just generally talking about the business threat landscape, what it looks like, and as you'll see, it's going to become very big picture very quickly, because from the perspective of a chief information security officer, the threat landscape is enormous, and there's so many different aspects to it. It is maybe a 100-dimension Rubik's Cube of topics and ideas and requirements and needs in an ever-escalating threat picture. Then we're going to talk about what cyber strategy and business continuity really have to do with each other, which is one of my favorite topics. Then we'll talk about components of cyber strategy. What is cybersecurity strategy? What comprises a cyber strategy? And then we're going to look at 3 aspects of that cyber strategy. How do you create and define cybersecurity programs, which is how you codify a cyber strategy? How do you implement cybersecurity programs, which is how you realize cyber strategy? And then how do you quantify your cybersecurity programs, which is all about cybersecurity program management. And then we'll be off to Q&A. Okay, first and foremost, the threat landscape right now, and I mean right now, not just because of COVID-19, but right now universally, even though the degree of risk during the COVID-19 mass transformation to work from home is exponentially growing. But the threat landscape can be summed up really in a single word. It's universal. The threat landscape is universal. It's no longer just multidimensional. The threats come in every way, in every manner, shape, and form. They come from almost every direction. They're really kind of omnipresent. And increasingly, they're nearly omnipotent. There are so many threats that can do so much damage to so many aspects of our businesses now, purely from the cybersecurity realm, because so much, if not all, of many of our enterprises are completely dependent and completely intertwined with how our business processes use, consume, and rely on information systems, information technology, and how humans interact with all of the above. We have electronic threats, of course. This is a given. There are digital threats of all types that are really from the birth of cybersecurity, from the birth of the computer age, really stemming from the fact that is pretty much well known that all of the internet and most of computer technology was designed with functionality in mind, not with security in mind. And most levels of security, most levels of control were added on to most of our technologies after they were designed first to be highly functional. But in addition to that, we have human threats. The human aspect of the threat landscape, the human factors picture, which we'll talk more about later, is also very, very important, as are environmental threats. And that includes external environmental threats, like everyone is managing right now, and internal environmental threats. Forces of nature, again, what we're all dealing with right now is pretty unprecedented, but it is very much in the threat landscape of causing issues with how businesses operate and affecting business continuity. Basically, keeping businesses operating, regardless of the events, regardless of the nature, direction, type of threat, is the name of the game. And that's very much true now more than ever before. So one might ask, and I've actually had this asked at least twice this past week, Why are so many cybersecurity experts so frequently involved in business continuity planning? This really used to not be the norm, but now very frequently when it's time to talk business continuity plan, business continuity implementation, the CISO or the cybersecurity expert on staff is right in the middle of that operation. Well, that's because in the really big picture of what cybersecurity strategy is intended to do, we are looking at three core aspects of business operations. We're looking at integrity of information systems and business processes and operations. We're looking at availability across the board, and we're looking at confidentiality. Those three aspects of cybersecurity, the three-legged stool, we often call it, of cybersecurity, has scope in it to cover the universality of the threat landscape that we just talked about. In other words, business continuity fits within this scope really well, especially when you consider the availability aspect of business management, being able to continue operating your business, using your core business processes, regardless of what else happens around you, and have those continue with integrity of the data, of the information, and with confidentiality so that there's not exposure, unwanted exposure of any sort of information, of data, of access while you're managing availability. So it really is a natural fit. So the current COVID-19 situation is but an example of the universality of this threat. And it really can be broken down into looking at the three-legged stool of cybersecurity to try to structure why this really makes sense from a CISO's perspective to talk business continuity to business leaders. For example, we're asking, can the workforce, whatever enterprise you're a part of, have full business process availability? Can we do our jobs while everyone works from home for 6 weeks or longer? Is the transition to that environment going to be smooth and seamless? Can it be managed in a way that confidentiality is maintained? Are we prepared? Do we have a plan? And then, of course, can we do all the above while maintaining integrity? Do we know what questions have to be asked about our information systems, our business processes, and their integrity? Do we know what it will take to make sure, and then not to just assume that it's working, but to know, to measure, to have metrics in place so that when the question comes, or worse yet, when there is an issue, we can see what controls or what parts of our cybersecurity strategy may or may not have been at fault or an issue or lacking, or where there may have been a gap. So the CIA triad fits very well into this bigger picture of how we prepare cybersecurity strategies. Cyber strategy is designed to manage precisely these kinds of issues. So here is just a quick little summary of some of the big threats everyone is familiar with. Everyone talks about ransomware. I mean, this is a big threat, obviously. Ransomware can take down, and regularly does, entire enterprises, can take down whole business segments. Insider threats, a little less talked about nowadays, but are significant. Honestly, the reason they're not as talked about probably as a ransomware is because many insider threat issues don't hit the news. They're often not in public. But inside enterprises, insider threats, when they occur, become suddenly very big news and something that has to be managed in an extremely delicate way. And now, of course, we're dealing with COVID-19. This is something that, unfortunately, many companies never considered. They haven't even looked at, and suddenly found themselves having to scramble to figure out solutions and approaches for this sort of business continuity issue. And then, of course, digital viruses and internal attacks, along with ransomware, extremely common. Credential harvesting, extremely common. Malware of other types, and on and on and on the list goes. So this is obviously just a little subset of what the threat landscape is. But that's not my core message here today. I don't consider any of those to be the biggest threat facing the landscape today in enterprises for any company. These, in a way, are almost symptoms of the problem. Now, in my opinion, and this comes from seeing a lot of companies work through these issues, the true threat is not having a strategy. The biggest threat is not having a comprehensive plan in place to manage these threats when they strike. It's no longer if they strike, it is when they strike, because all of the above are happening all the time. In a way, COVID-19 has been a bit of an eye-opener, an awakener to a lot of enterprises that there's so much more at stake and so much more that can happen. And it helps to put the focus where I really think it should be, on strategy and on planning, so that you're not having to react, but you can actually implement a plan and move forward regardless of what the threat source is. So at this point, I want to pause and bring in our partners at the Columbus Collaboratory to comment from their perspective on the importance of strategy versus pure tactical approaches to enterprise cybersecurity and how you manage the universality of this threat.
Thanks, Kevin. This is Jeff Schmidt from the Collaboratory, and yeah, so much of what we do in security really needs to have a bigger picture strategy and understanding of the threat in mind. The absence of having a bigger picture, strategic understanding of the risk landscape and the space is you wind up on a random walk, if you will, buying tools and services because they have blinky shiny lights, and the vendor threw the best party at RSA last year, or what have you. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of security decisions get made. The space is very confusing. There's a lot of point solutions out there, a lot of folks telling you a lot of different things. But it's really important that people understand what their risk looks like, what their risk tolerance is. Risk will never be zero. And so the job of an information security practitioner, an information security program, is to communicate the risks to the business, help the business manage those risks to acceptable levels, and understand what the trade-offs are between security and resiliency spend versus business risk, and then keep tabs on that on an ongoing basis. Everything's changing so fast from a business perspective, and then obviously with the current pandemic even more. And so really communicating what the risks are, what the acceptable risks are, coming to an agreement on what the acceptable risks are, and then helping to mitigate to those levels. And then from there, once you understand the strategic and the business impacts, selecting tools, selecting policies and procedures and all that to support that is really important. So I'm a fan of a very kind of top-down business-driven approach to security, driven by a strategy, as opposed to a tactical tool-driven approach where you're chasing blinky lights and tools that may or may not contribute to your strategic interests.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. That is exactly the I think the right perspective. There's so much that can be done and that often is done purely tactically, that then leaves out a lot of aspects of strategy, planning, and management. And that when you do have those things in place, when you do have sort of what we're about to review, a multidimensional approach to strategy, that opens the doors to so much more clarity in what you have to do down when you do get into implementation and into the tactical, which still has to happen. That's great. Thank you. So speaking of that, let's talk a little bit now about the components of a cybersecurity strategy. Again, cybersecurity programs. This is a phrase, these are terms that are thrown around pretty often, but unfortunately, it's also pretty frequent that people don't really know what it means. What exactly is a cybersecurity program? And what does it mean to have a cyber strategy? Well, we leverage a framework that kind of helps paint the picture of what it means to say, well, we have a cyber strategy. And that involves a multidimensional approach with 3 core dimensions: human factors, operations, and technology. The human factors, of course, are people and culture. It involves things like training, cybersecurity culture, and all the aspects about actual human involvement, which are so critical and unfortunately are often overlooked. Then there's the operations component. This is business processes. These are policies. These are compliance requirements. This is the overview and management of both cybersecurity and IT. all of the operational processes. Sometimes business process reengineering is needed. Sometimes changing how business is done to be more secure, independent of the technology that's providing all the support underneath. Then, of course, a third dimension, the technology dimension, is also critical. It can't be overlooked. There are some environments, particularly in the public sector, and those of you who have experience in the in government cybersecurity or government IT may have seen some of the opposite of what you see in the private sector, where sometimes there's such a focus on operations and a policy and process that the technology aspect might come in a little bit lagging. Technology and tools cannot be left second fiddle, of course. You still have to have best of breed tech and best of breed tools. We'll talk more about that in a minute as well. But all three components define a cybersecurity strategy, and these are going to be unique to every business. What your individual strategy is can be painted as a picture that blends how much emphasis you need in your specific business on each of these dimensions. Maybe you have a lot of technology and tools in place and have been very tactical and need to blend now a strategy that increases human factors focus, that increases operations focus. Maybe you have a ton of policies written and a lot of procedures in process, but have left out the human factors aspect and are weak in training, don't have a good cyber culture. How you blend these dimensions really gives you a vision of what your cybersecurity strategy is. Once you have a strategy identified, then you can create what we call a cybersecurity program. And here we get to the meat of that question. What really is a cybersecurity program? Well, it's more than these four quadrants that are on the screen. They're there to show you really what does not fully define a cybersecurity program. It's not just documentation. Cyber policies do not give you a cyber program. They help define it. They can give you requirements. It's not just procedures. A cybersecurity program is not just having procedures defined, and it's not just processes, and it's not just tech and tools. It's more than all of these. A real cybersecurity program is the enterprise's adoption of that strategic cybersecurity view that you created, looking at all of those three dimensions, and involves all of these other aspects and more to actually move from strategy into defining the aspects of your approach and then into implementation. Now, business continuity planning is a natural part of the program scope when you have this sort of a big picture view of what a cybersecurity program really is. It's a natural fit to talk about how all of this really supports keeping business operating no matter what happens inside or outside of the enterprise. So cybersecurity programs, basically I define this as how you codify your cyber strategy. You create a strategy, you define for your individual enterprise what the requirements are, where you need your focus to be, and then you codify that within a cybersecurity program. That does involve documentation, process, policy, and more. You cover all of the domains of cybersecurity. And this list of 9 is a tiny subset of what is usually listed out as maybe 20, 25 different domains that cybersecurity is involved in. But obviously, identity and access management, perimeter protection, disaster recovery, vendor management, asset management, all of these are domains within cybersecurity's purview, but there are many more. And for each of the domains that cybersecurity touches on, you look at the full scope of the CIA triad, how these affect confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and you look at all three dimensions of your strategy. What you decided in advance needs to be focused on within your specific strategy. For example, maybe within vendor management, you've been doing some things to check in on vendor cybersecurity and third parties, but maybe there's been no process or plan in place. You're lacking in the operations dimension. Maybe you do vulnerability management, you do patching, you do penetration tests, but perhaps there's very little training about the nature of vulnerability management across your IT staff, and maybe there's questions about that. It's all been automated. Whatever it might be, you look at all of the aspects, again, like a very multidimensional Rubik's Cube, to implement and codify your strategy. And then that brings us into implementation. When you're implementing your cyber program, This is how you realize that same original cyber strategy. You strategize, you create plans in the program, and then you implement. You transition into what you're actually going to do. This requires a comprehensive approach, an enterprise scale approach, and experienced cyber personnel. You've got to have top tech and tool alignment. This is critical. Having the top technology and tools in that technology dimension is, of course, important, but not in and of itself. Not only do you need to have the best of breed when it comes to tech and tools, you also need to have alignment in those technologies and tools. And that it cannot be overlooked. I have a little bit of an enterprise architecture background in my history, which looks at big picture business and IT alignment, making sure that business processes work with the IT and that your IT is aligned to what your business needs to do. Well, there is such thing as cybersecurity enterprise architecture as well, making sure that your cybersecurity needs and requirements defined in your cyber program, driven by your strategy, align with the tools and processes and tech that you have in place. In other words, you're not redundantly buying tools and tech and bells and whistles and blinky lights that are going to be a waste of money and waste of time because you've duplicated functionality. Or, much worse, you've invested a lot in tools and tech and still have gaps because you've never mapped out how your technology aligns with your needs, your requirements. And all the time, you're going to balance cost and quality, of course. And actually, we'll get more into how you get into cost and quality balancing when we get to the next phase, talking about how you manage a cybersecurity program. But here is another key aspect. Gone are the days when cybersecurity can really be enterprise structured and managed in most mid-sized companies without having trusted partners in the mix. It is rarely now an internal only function unless you're a very, very large organization with a very large IT and cybersecurity and program management staff that can manage these different aspects. The key nowadays to help with balancing cost and quality and to get the insights is to leverage trusted partners, to build a team that is going to really reach into all these different arenas with the experience, the alignment history and knowledge, and that can help you balance cost and quality via trusted partners. So with that, actually, given all these complexities and all the scope and the need for this, I want to reach over to the collaboratory again and ask either Jeff or Troy, can you speak to that additionally from your perspective?
Yeah, I can. I can hop in. So, I mean, Kevin, you make some really fantastic points here, specifically around experienced cyber personnel, the top tech and tool alignment and trusted partners. So the cybersecurity program and the domains are so complex at this point that the organizations that the collaboratory engages with on a regular basis, we're finding that once you get past maybe the Fortune 100 in company size or in business size, the ability for organizations to consume and to operate these security programs drops off very, very drastically in a lot of ways. There's a limit in experienced cyber personnel that are out there today. The tools are very, very complex that they're being asked to manage, they're being asked to use. And in fact, in almost every circumstance that we've seen, most of the tools that our organizations are spending money on, they're configured about 40–50% of the way. Most of the new features that are coming out on a regular basis are not even vetted in a lot of ways before they're applied, if they're even applied to that particular use case. So that's where the trusted partner comes in and becomes incredibly important to consider in your security program. Why? Because we can rely on those trusted partners that are vetted, they are experienced in that particular discipline and in that particular domain. We can develop close relationships and close partnerships with them. And then we can also allow them to bring a third-party perspective into our security programs that we may not see as we go through the day-to-day operations and we have our blinders on what our security program looks like. So I think you're right on the mark here. There's no question. The lack of talent and then the lack of resources and time to configure these tools really requires us to rely on these trusted partners more and more every day.
Absolutely, and very, very well said. That is spot on. And as Jason introduced, the nature of the virtual CISO concept and the nature of the capabilities that the Columbus Collaboratory brings on is really designed to target this need. The fact that so much now is required within this realm of managing cybersecurity, information security, and the big picture of what it all entails requires so much experience now. It requires so much knowledge and requires such a team in an arena worldwide now where there's always a constant lack of that kind of expertise. And when you can find it, it's exorbitantly expensive to kind of bring that talent on full time in a team that may not have any need for that sort of full-time presence. So building teams with trusted partners in this kind of a concept where you are bringing on partners who can help fill those gaps and yet not really be a part of your team. You're not hiring FTEs, you're bringing on partners that are literally helping in all the ways that you need while having nowhere near the impact on, again, your cost, your budget, and the quality. So it's really the key, I think, to implementation when it comes to how you really realize these strategies is in that trusted partner segment. And I think it's only going to grow for years to come. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a little more about that implementation aspect, how we realize our cyber strategy. Again, we want to not ignore that initial strategy when we get into implementation mode. There has to be a view back to the beginning, back to the big picture, while you focus on the tactical and on the smaller picture. You want to keep in mind the human factors aspects in every domain. You want to always focus as well on business processes and on compliance, that operations dimension. And similarly, technology and tools, once again, they cannot be ignored. Now, neither should they be focused on at the expense of the other dimensions. Not having just a technology and tool approach would be a mistake, as we just heard several times. The idea is to balance these things in a way that fits your business, that fits your enterprise. And then you need to test. You've got to test your defenses. You've got to test your disaster recovery. You have to test your data protection, and so on through every domain of cybersecurity. You have to test the processes and tools you put in place for training and for human factors. You have to test your employees. Everything needs to be involved within a validation and verification cycle so that you're not just hoping that all the things you design and implement work, but that you can actually see it, which again, we're going to talk about more on the management aspect, program management of a cyber program as well. And of course, coming to the main focus of this session, you test your business continuity plan. You test it early and you test it often. You do it in conjunction with all of the above. Business continuity is yet another domain that fits within the big picture scope of cybersecurity. You've got to test these things before there is an incident. There's one client that we serve who I'm just tickled as I could be. It makes my day to know that several months ago, we sat in a conference room and we tested their business continuity plan. We did a tabletop environment test with business leaders from all over the enterprise. And it makes my day to know that one of the things I said to this crowd of leaders was, okay, let's review the scenario where a pandemic rocks the entire region and everyone has to work from home. How does that look given our plan? And we walked through every step of what that would look like. And this was long before I had any inkling that this was going to become a problem or an issue. And here we are. When this happened, that company, they knew exactly what they needed to do. It had been tested, it had been planned, and it was simply a matter of turning on the process. And of course, they're still learning. There's still actions that have been taken since that have been beneficial to improve the plan. But that is the key. The truth is, because of trusted partners, there is no reason that all of these various aspects of threats can't be planned for and managed. It's the right way to go about implementing strategy, doing all of these pre-planning, strategic approach items, and then testing and proving and improving over time. Which brings us to cybersecurity program management, which is cyber strategy quantified. So again, when Jason introduced me, he mentioned that one of the things that Vernovus excels at is maintaining cybersecurity programs over time. So this is an insight that really comes with understanding that cybersecurity is not just tech and tools. What's interesting about tech and tools and just IT-focused cybersecurity, there is unfortunately a belief still out there in some arenas that cybersecurity is something you buy, you turn it on, and you're done, which nothing could be further than the truth. If all you think is tactical and tech and tools, you can make that mistake of thinking, I just have to go buy this firewall and these kinds of switches and this kind of email monitoring and that tool and this tool, turn them on, cyber's done, thank you for your help, trusted partner, you can leave now. No, cybersecurity programs need to be maintained over time, operationally and strategically, because business changes, threats change, people change, everything changes. And there is no such thing as turning on cybersecurity and you're done. All of the change, particularly in technologies and in the nature of technological threats, which I can't even begin to summarize in this webinar, make the need for managing your cyber program in a universal way have to parallel just how universal the threat space is. So cyber program management leverages measures and metrics to quantify results and pursue continuous improvement. That, again, now is the key to being able to understand the ROI of your cybersecurity investments and what you're really getting. Because if you're measuring and improving and actually being aware of the investments, how they work, what happens, what needs to change, that gives you insight into understanding what's happening for the dollars you spend for your cybersecurity investment, what the impacts are, what the cyber ROI is versus the losses you could have when there is a certain kind of incident if it happens and you aren't prepared for it. So program management is key. Maintenance over time is essential. You just don't fire and forget with cybersecurity. And that is the core of our presentation. And we can move now into Q&A. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type them in. I haven't seen any pop up yet. Let's give people a chance in case anything has come to mind.
There is a question in the Zoom chat.
Oh, let me see. Okay, yeah, we can touch on this. Kevin or Jeff or Troy, do you guys have any insight on how, current cyber tool / system vendors are currently approaching clients given COVID, and kind of what so I guess the concern is like maybe being slammed with different cyber vendors given the current situation, and maybe, how a program leader like you guys could help partner with them or navigate, I guess, these kind of outreaches or just their cyber program in general.
Oh, definitely. I can definitely start on that one. I watch my email and I get probably at a normal week before all of this, 7, 8, maybe 10 emails a day that are from vendors, general vendors in cybersecurity for various domains of cyber. Since COVID-19, that's probably doubled or tripled, with, of course, all the subject lines being focused on all of the aspects specific to this event. Now, that's not always a bad thing. I mean, obviously, there are good tools out there, but if I put myself in the position of being a CIO internal to an organization, and I do have needs, and I'm being bombarded in this way, it points to a single thing: needing to know before, or at the very least during, an event like this, what my big picture cyber plan is, what my cyber strategy is, where my gaps are, so that I know at the very beginning which of these great sometimes offers and capabilities out there I need, so that I'm not just responding tactically and possibly lining up and working with a tool or a vendor that doesn't make sense for me. So it does put some of the focus back on having a strategy and then having a cybersecurity program in place with expertise in place to help me evaluate those tools, evaluate the technologies and partners, and have an idea of what needs to happen moving forward.
Yeah, this is Jeff, and I would agree with that. Certainly, security vendors are tailoring their message to the current environment, and that's fine. The flip side is that there are some very specific tactical issues that the mass work from home scenario that we're all dealing with now have kind of shined a light on, and the security vendors that have mechanisms to address those are an opportunity to add value. A couple that have come across my desk recently, and that I believe are things we should be thinking about. First of all, a lot of folks have put up various technical mechanisms to facilitate work from home, access to applications, VPNs, things like that, quickly. A VPN gateway to allow you to remote desktop into a machine at your desk, or a web app to do something that you need to do from home that previously was not available. The bad guys know that this is happening, and they're actively looking for those systems. And so an opportunity to have a security expert look at these systems. How do we have our VPN configured? Are we using single factor authentication? Are we using a platform that the bad guys are going to hurt us with? Are we using a web app that has vulnerabilities in it? So having a security review of anything you've put up quickly in the last couple of weeks would be time well spent. Similarly, a lot of these machines that are now sitting on people's desks at home were not set up with the intention of having these disconnected from the enterprise networks for long periods of time. And so we're seeing increased attention on kind of tactical endpoint sorts of mechanisms. I mean, machines oftentimes don't receive their updates unless they're connected on the company premise. A lot of times these machines don't have endpoint security tools involved. They've relied on being behind the firewalls and IDSs and other sorts of things at the enterprise. And now all of a sudden they're connected to a home network. Issues around machine sharing. A work machine that has sensitive data or has the ability to access sensitive data is now being used by a child for accessing homeschooling applications, or playing games. So the machines are being used in ways that were not previously intended. And I think there's value in looking tactically at what your new risk profile is, and identifying vendors that might be able to help you there, given this new scenario we're in.
Yeah, that's a great point you made, Jeff. That honestly, I wish I'd included in the core slides. The nature of the specific COVID-19 related threat right now. To quote a movie that maybe some of you are old enough to remember, like me, Top Gun. We are in such a target-rich environment right now. If you are
Yes.
a cyber criminal, it's that
Yep.
cybercrime thrives on change.
Yep.
Whenever there's change, you are at a peak of vulnerability. And all of a sudden, if you're a cyber criminal or you're running a cybercrime organization, you've got an entire nation and an entire world simultaneously in flux, making changes. Change is absolutely the worst thing when it comes to overall enterprise cybersecurity protection. That's when gaps are most often revealed. And so it's kind of like, I would say from their perspective, the criminal's perspective, like shooting fish in a barrel. When you've got so much change happening literally within days and weeks, or so many enterprises, it's frightening. And it really does, again, it calls calls to attention the need to be checking, to be careful, to use trusted partners, to evaluate, and to have a plan. Even when you have to execute quickly, it's difficult. If you didn't have a plan already, you've got to move, but don't make big changes without having support, without getting help when you're making it.
And Kevin, that actually really underscores the importance of the cyber strategy in your organization, right? So that you can be prepared for these types of situations. I mean, we've talked about it, at length here. But the ability for your security operations to maintain continuity is going to depend on how well your strategy has planned for this sort of situation. We know for a fact that any huge incident or a huge issue that's going on in the world will become a target to threat actors. We know it. In a lot of cases, we're afraid to actually test our controls to deal with those. For example, one of the regular discussions we have with our customers is you want to do real world phishing campaign tests. We want to test real world scenarios. We don't want to do these random phishing campaigns. If there's something going on around COVID-19 as an organization, I want to test my phishing controls based on COVID-19 because that is exactly what the threat actors are going to be doing. So if I'm using this opportunity to see how my workforce actually reacts to this threat, I've got to think about real world scenarios, but I can't do that if I don't have a sound strategy in place that is well tested. It maintains continuity, whether my entire workforce is at home or if we're all sitting in the office. I think this whole COVID-19 really underscores the value and the importance of these strategy sessions and these security programs. Without the structure of the security program, without the frameworks that build up the formation or create the formation of these programs, as soon as Tyson would say, as soon as you get punched in the mouth, all your plans go away, right?
Exactly right. Great reference.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question that came in. Many times business units assume that IT has things covered and it doesn't. Any tips for elevating the discussion out of the tech-only mode to participation by all leaders and managers, or key questions business ops should ask?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Look, for the last 20 years, cybersecurity has been viewed by the business folks as a nerd problem. And I say that lovingly because I'm one of those nerds that have been dealing with this problem for 20 years. It's something that, the business people that, go to meetings dressed like Kevin, toss over the wall to, a bunch of nerds dressed like Troy and and throw money at them and hope that it goes away. And in reality, we as security folks need to, the most important thing that we do is communicate risk with business people. We need to learn as practitioners how to communicate in business terms, how to communicate effectively with business people about risk, about trade-offs. So often, technical people are very absolute. There's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. There's a secure way and a non-secure way, and everybody's an idiot, and all those sorts of kind of grumpy things that technical people do, but they just don't work. The business people shut them off. And so the most important thing that we do as security folks is communicate risk to business people. And when we don't effectively communicate risk to business people, we wind up with scenarios like the question just described. The business people assume everything is fine, and then when things are not fine, people get fired because they assumed everything was fine and nobody effectively communicated any differently. So communicating in terms of risk and communicating in terms of trade-offs, being a partner at the table as the business folks are discussing these things, it's really important. It's easier said than done. It's something that you have to, as a technical person, you have to earn. That's why I, suggest technical people, try to educate themselves on how business folks interact. Get in the meetings, talk about the trade-offs, and get yourself engaged in the conversation. And I'll say, by the way, in the collaboratory universe, a lot of what we do among the most senior folks in our members and clients, from the CISOs and the CIOs, is talk amongst ourselves about how to communicate what I call upward communication, communicate these risk topics with their business folks. Everybody is communicating with their boards on a regular cadence, their senior executives on a regular cadence, and how to be effective there is really important.
So if I could hop in here real quick. So, I mean, Jeff, you make a great point. One of the things I want to add is it is incumbent upon, as you phrased it, folks who are dressed like me, right, who are very technical, to be able to extract and pull information out of the folks that are dressed like Kevin. So what I mean by that is the world that I operate a lot in these days is threat intelligence. And intelligence is designed and it's meant to be able to give information to leadership so that they can make the decisions that will send the business in the directions that they want to go. It is very, very difficult to do intelligence if you don't understand what is important to the business. So we have to be able to go and extract that information. And there's a number of ways that we do it. One way is gathering what we call intelligence requirements, whether they're general intelligence requirements or they're, or they're, strategic intelligence requirements or tactical. We still need to understand what business units need what information, how they need it formatted so that they can make the decisions that they need to make. So this conversation has to be a two-way street. We need to understand what they want from us and how we present it, and they need to understand from us the information in a way that they can consume it so that they can make the decisions that they need to make. Technical folks generally don't talk to the business the way that the business wants to hear it to be consumed, and the business doesn't talk to us the right way. So we need to figure out how to bridge that communication gap.
So yeah, let me jump in on just that point. Not to be overwhelmingly self-serving, but that job of being able to bridge the gap from IT to leadership, from CIO and IT manager up to CEO, CFO, and then board of directors, that is a great role for trusted partners like those of us right here, like myself and Jeff and Troy, to fulfill. That's almost one of our specialties. A lot of the pathways that are used, many of the pathways that we've used to help clients with that specific challenge is to partner with them, do overall cybersecurity program assessments, very technical and also very human factors and operations focused, and then use those as tools with trusted partners like myself and Troy and Jeff to move upward into the organization and present the big picture and help deliver that message as an outside expert to an enterprise that is rather closed and maybe has its own internal culture already, bringing the message from outside experts saying, here is the right way to look at your big picture of information security from all of these different dimensions, and here's how to move forward and become safer and better and proactive and strategic. Often you can't really get that message delivered if you're the IT manager and you're trying to push it. But sometimes it's that external view coming in, bringing in that third party and saying, hey, here's what we see. Let's sit down with senior management. Let's sit down with your board of directors, and here's a way forward.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So when you get involved with companies, how much overlap do you often see in tools they have purchased for cyber? And I'll also add to that, how often do you see the tools that they are paying for not fully utilized?
Lots of both.
Lots of both. Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's kind of a good summary for this whole call, right? The theme here is have a strategy and execute against that strategy, understand the big picture. Failing to do that, you wind up with a whole bunch of disjoint point technology solutions. A lot of times they overlap, a lot of times they're only partially implemented. And the result is you don't have a great defense, and you're not maximizing the security value for the money you're spending. And all of those things happen quite often. I can't resist. I have to answer the question in the Zoom chat. The question is, why did we use Zoom for this webinar since the New York governor indicated this mode shouldn't be used due to hackers, blah, blah, blah.
I wonder if someone was going to ask that.
Yeah, so look, I have complicating feelings on this sort of thing, but this is the sort of absolutism that is not helpful in security. And the New York governor is great, but I hardly think he's a cybersecurity or a risk expert, and should avoid making blanket statements like that. Everything is a question of risk and balance. Zoom is a great platform. It's done a lot more good than bad. Like any platform, it can be used securely or insecurely. And like any platform, it has bugs and flaws that bad guys will seek to exploit. Because of the current environment, I guarantee you nobody is looking harder for Zoom. And by the way, WebEx and Teams bugs and flaws more in the last 2 weeks than bad guys. And all of these platforms are going to have problems. And depending on your risk profile, you should consider the platform that you're using for the communication. This is effectively a public meeting. I don't care if hackers came in and are looking at our meeting. I might care if hackers came in and displayed porn. That would not be nice. But there's nothing particularly confidential about this. If I'm discussing, a non-public deal that's going to move the market value, of a company by billions of dollars, I might think about what platform I'm using. There's no perfect platform for that. LTE phones can be eavesdropped on. Landlines can be eavesdropped on. The ubiquitous Cisco IP phones that are sitting on everybody's desk can be eavesdropped on. So yeah, it's a question of risk. I do think on the conferencing platforms in particular, two very practical things. First of all, Zoom is trying. I think the Zoom conference client has been updated every day this week. A lot of times when machines are not on their corporate networks, they're not getting updates. This is bad, particularly with vulnerable clients. So make sure that your conferencing clients, particularly Zoom and Slack and Teams and WebEx, that are getting frequent updates now because they've never been tested this much, are getting updates to improve your security. Secondly, train your people. A lot of the problems with Zoom have been around inappropriate use, people not assigning passwords, people reusing URLs. Big problem with WebEx too, by the way. If you use personal rooms in WebEx, you have a static URL that anybody can eavesdrop on. So there's a training issue there too, so that people can use these platforms securely. I'll jump off my security guy soapbox now.
and everything you guys just said, again, you touched on operational issues and policy issues. You touched on human factors and training, and we talked about technology. That paints that picture so well. That's what you can, if you have the foresight, take the initiative to have a strategy, develop a cybersecurity program, and look at these things in advance. Then when they come, you have already got a structure in place that's going to give you the guidelines for managing just this sort of operation. You'll have looked at vulnerability management and patching during a disaster when all of your laptops are out at random homes instead of in your corporate policy, and maybe have identified, hey, we need to be able to make sure patching still happens in this environment, and so on and so forth. It's strategy and planning. I know I've said it probably 1,000 times, but I could say it 1,000 more. That's the answer, and it's not too late. These need to be happening now, moving forward. This is really the right time to start looking in that direction. It's a strategic view in the big picture for the enterprise.
So if I could hop in real quick and just add one last final little point to everything that's been discussed so far, specifically around having a strategy to your security program and those sorts of things. One of the things that I think doesn't get discussed enough is what are we actually defending against? Okay. When we develop our security programs from a perspective of, it's very random. I hear about these tools. I know I need them. We don't really have a strategy behind all of that stuff. It is equally as important to understand what my threat model is, what my threat profile is. Who are the types of campaigns or the types of threat actors or the types of threats that would target me? We can all react, and we should be reacting to the automated, the widespread, the things that spread around like the ransomwares and those sorts of things. Those sorts of commodity things are much easier to deal with than are the targeted, concerted threat actor that happens to be interested in the financial sector or in the healthcare sector or in the education sector because there's a ton of research information. So the point I want to make here is as you're going through these strategy sessions and you're trying to figure out who you want to be, how you want to get there, and how long it's going to take you to do it and what steps you're going to take, please think about starting with who wants my data? What data do I have to protect? What are the capabilities and the tactics and techniques that those actors would leverage? And that's going to get you a very far down the road to understanding the types of tools that you need, why you need them, how you need to configure them so that you don't run into the position where you've got gaps in tools or you've got massive overlaps in tools. Because if we think from a controls perspective, to control the types of techniques and tactics that are leveraged out in the wild, against our types of organizations, then we can be much more strategic in how we plan our purchases, our resources, our human beings, and everything that comes along with that. I think threat modeling has to become one of the first couple of things that we do when we start thinking of what our security program strategy is. Off my soapbox.
Thank you. I think I could listen to the three of you go on all day. But unfortunately, we're just over our time. So I'm going to hand things over to Ben to wrap us up. But yeah.
On that, you have an opportunity to listen to the three of us 2 more times. So
exactly. Ben, go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Petra. Thank you, Kevin, Troy, and Jeff for sharing your insights. And a big thanks to you, Petra, for organizing this webinar. We at the Columbus Collaboratory and Vernovus thank you for your time this morning. We hope that you found today helpful. We welcome any follow-up questions regarding this presentation. Please engage with us. Please mark your calendars for our next 2 sessions on 2 critical aspects of your cybersecurity program. We tell a lot of our clients that if you're going to do 2 things well, these are 2 things that you should be buttoned up incredibly good at in terms of securing your enterprise. On April 16th, we'll be talking about vulnerability management. On April 23rd, we'll be covering identity access management. Please mark your calendars. We look forward to seeing you, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.